What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter, Burt, and Ed, bringing you guys the final installment in my brief three-part series previewing the ACC season ahead. My first video, I went over teams that I thought would be kind of fighting for bowl eligibility, went over which teams I think will improve, which teams will regress, and finding kind of which teams I think will make a bowl game. Then I went over the dark horses, which teams I thought had a chance to kind of break out the middle of the pack, going over those teams where I thought they did or did not have that opportunity. In this video, I'm going to be going over the contenders in the conference, but before I do, if you go on to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I upload. Starting things out, a team that most people probably have in top 4 or 5 of the conference, that's the Louisville Cardinals. They finished 9-4 last year. They have a top 20 offense that brings back a pair of really good running backs, Isaac Brown, who rushed for almost 1,200 yards last year, and Duke Watson, who is just under 600 yards. Those two guys combined for 18 total touchdowns. They bring in USC quarterback Miller Moss, who torched this Cardinals team, actually, as a quarterback for the Trojans a couple of years ago in the Holiday Bowl. So he's coming in. I think he threw 6 touchdown passes in that game. And his main target is going to be Chris Bell. He's the leading returning receiver, 237 yards and 4 touchdowns last year. They've got 2 offensive lineman starters coming back, and they also make a pretty good addition out of the portal. Purdue's Mahamane Musa, who played both a little bit of tackle, a little bit of guard, both on the left side. So it'd be interesting to see where he slots in for the Cardinals. The defense did really well against the run, ranking 40th nationally, but they struggled against the pass, ranking 100th. Their linebackers, Shanquan Clark and TJ Quinn, kind of lead the way in the middle of the defense. Defensive back Joe Jefferson is their main guy in the secondary after transferring in from Western Michigan. He's the key guy to watch there. I think for this Louisville team, a 3-0 start is probably a given based on their schedule. I think 5-0 is a distinct possibility. If they are able to achieve that, they'll roll into that game at Miami with a chance to potentially grab a huge win there in the conference race. They're also home against Clemson on November 14th and at SMU the following week. Another game that is kind of a little bit of a trap type game to watch is at Virginia Tech November 1st. Lane Stadium's always a tough place to win. So that's the type of game that they lose that, they probably fall out of the consideration even before they have those big games against Clemson and SMU. Speaking of those Mustangs, a team that made the ACC championship game last year, SMU, and the College Football Playoff. SMU finished 11-3 last year. They had the number 8 scoring offense, and they got a lot of those pieces coming back. Quarterback Kevin Jennings accounted for over 3,600 total yards in 11 full games. He kind of split time with Preston Stone in the first 3 games of the year. So the final 11 he played, and those are still some really good numbers there. Tight end RJ Maryland was kind of battling some injuries last year, but he has emerged onto the scene. And then Miami running back Chris Johnson Jr. has kind of some similar traits to Brashard Smith, who played for the Mustangs last year. Jordan Hudson returns at receiver. He had 422 yards and 5 touchdowns. They also bring back 3 offensive linemen. Defensively, they ranked 7th nationally against the rush last year. Terry Webb is a big part of that, defensive lineman. They're bringing in actually a lot of transfers on the defensive side. Baylor defensive end Trey Wilson, defensive tackles William Spencer from Louisville and Jeffrey Mba from Purdue, and then also they're bringing in quarterback Zake Barker from East Carolina. Cornerback Marcellus Barnes, safety Ahmad Moses, and Isaiah Nwokobia are some really good guys in that secondary to watch for the Mustangs. Some good experience returning there, although they weren't quite as good against the pass. They did have a pretty good defense last year. Some of their key games to watch, they've got a couple of tough non-conference games early on, home against Baylor. I'll talk about them more in the Big 12 series. They're definitely being hyped up a lot in the Big 12 this year. At TCU, home against Syracuse, then the big game at Clemson, probably the best game on the ACC schedule this year, rematch of that ACC championship game at Clemson on October 18th, home against Miami, and home against Louisville. SMU, their schedule sets up pretty nicely. They've got all those games against teams that I think are either dark horses or legit contenders in the conference at home outside of Clemson. They could probably afford to lose that game to Clemson. And if they win the rest of those games, they probably finish with one conference loss, and I think that's certainly a possibility. They've got a good offense, good returning pieces, and they've got a good defense with some good returning players and some good additions out of the portal. Next up, a team that has had pretty disastrous finishes to seasons recently. That's the Miami Hurricanes. They were 10-3 last year, but that's after starting the season 9-0 and losing 3 of the last 4. They had similar finishes the last couple of seasons. In 2022, they went 1-3 again down the stretch, and they went 1-4 down the stretch in 2023. They bring in quarterback Carson Beck, who the question is now, will he be the star, or will he kind of battle injury and some of those struggles that he had at Georgia? Now, he still posted good numbers for the Bulldogs, don't get me wrong. I think a lot of people think he just fell off the face of the earth, but he was still a good quarterback at Georgia, but not as good as he was a couple of seasons ago. Running back Mark Fletcher, tight end Elijah Lofton, and then emerging wide receiver Ray Joseph are the key guys to watch on offense. They got 3 offensive linemen, starters returning, and they also bring in a good transfer from TCU, James Brockermeyer. Offensively, this was the number 1 scoring and total offense and number 3 passing offense in college football last year. But it's going to be all on Beck's shoulders to replace the production of the number 1 pick in the NFL draft, Cam Ward. So that is going to be certainly a challenge for Beck, but I think he has some good pieces around him, a good kind of foundation, and having those guys at offensive line will be huge for him. Defensively, the Hurricanes were top 20 against the rush. That starts with their defensive linemen, Ruben Bain Jr. and Akeem Mesidor. Those guys combined for 9 sacks and were definitely persistent in getting into the backfield. Bain had a little bit of a step back, I think, from his really breakout freshman season or maybe sophomore season. But Mesidor kind of picked up some of the slack there. A couple good linebackers, Wesley Besainth and Ahmad Moten Sr. And then in the back half, cornerback O.J. Frederick and defensive back Zachariah Poyser is a transfer coming in from Jacksonville State that has received a lot of hype in the offseason. Their key games starts with Notre Dame in the opener. I think it's a Sunday night game. That's big to have that one at home. I know Hard Rock Stadium isn't exactly a home field advantage, but not having to travel is obviously a good thing. They're also home against Florida, at Florida State, home against Louisville, at SMU, home against Syracuse, home against NC State, at Virginia Tech, and at Pitt. Those last 2 games that I mentioned kind of fall into the area of trap games, considering their finishes the last couple of seasons, even a loss to Georgia Tech. Those are certainly a couple of games to keep an eye on. Outside of that, a lot of those games are winnable, but the way they've played, they just seem to trip up in 1 or 2 of those games. And they've got a lot of kind of the top teams in the ACC this year. They do avoid Clemson during regular season, which is huge. So if they can beat a couple of those teams, I think they also benefit to not play Duke. Duke is a team that I think could break into this contending group. But at SMU is tough. At Florida State could be if the Seminoles are better by that point in the season. Home against Louisville as well, and then some of those other games. And in terms of their college football playoff hopes, Notre Dame is going to be a really tough win week 1. But finally, arriving at the number 1 contender and pretty clearly the favorite in the ACC is the Clemson Tigers. They were 10-4 last year, ACC champs, college football playoff appearance, obviously. I think this team is a legitimate national championship contender. They've got a top 3 quarterback in Cade Klubnik, maybe even top 2 or even best in college football. A top 3 receiving room, Antonio Williams, TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco Jr., all 3 received at least 650 yards last year. 4 offensive linemen return. Again, I've talked about this before. That continuity is massive. They've got probably the number 1 or 2 defensive lineman group with defensive end TJ Parker, defensive tackle Peter Woods. A top 3 linebacker group, maybe top 5, Wade Woodaz, Sammy Brown. They had a plus 16 turnover margin last year, so they know how to get takeaways. That is kind of included in Avion Terrell and Ashton Hampton at cornerback, along with Khalil Barnes at free safety. And the defense might get even better than it was last year. They bring in Tom Allen, who coordinated the Penn State defense last year, which was among the best in college football. So the outlook for Clemson is obviously very bright. They're home against LSU to open up, which is huge getting that game at home. That's going to be a really good battle at quarterbacks. Klubnik against Garrett Nussmeier. Home against Syracuse, type of game you got to watch out for. A little sneaky. At UNC, same idea. Home against SMU. Then three straight games. Home against Duke and Florida State, and then at Louisville. That's a good stretch, the tough stretch of games, and then at South Carolina to wrap up the season. Arguably, the toughest two games are out of conference, LSU and South Carolina, but SMU at home is also going to be a big one. I think Duke at home 2 weeks after that one is also going to be a big one, and if Florida State starts clicking, that one will be as well. But ultimately, I think it's a pretty clear choice who I think wins the conference this year. I think it's Clemson, and then it's just kind of a matter of who do I think gets in and who do the Tigers beat on the way to the college football playoff, and I think potentially even an undefeated record. There certainly are a couple games in there Clemson could lose. I'm honestly between SMU, Duke, and maybe Miami. Those are the three teams that I think have the best shot to get in the ACC championship game, most likely against Clemson. And honestly, I think Duke has the best shot to do it. I think Miami, they just year after year have those games that they should win, that they end up losing. Maybe they finally break that this year. But I am going with
Clemson over Duke.
The ACC, when it was divisions, always seemed to have that like rotation. Clemson was on that run of dominance, and that continued this past year, and it was always kind of a rotation. It's been a few years since Duke was in this game. I think the Blue Devils, Manny Diaz, gets to this conference championship game. Clemson over Duke, and I think Duke could be, I'll talk about this more when I go over my playoff rankings, kind of fully predicting the season as a whole, not just conference by conference, whether I think they might be able to get in. So stay tuned for that. But that's all for this episode of College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burnett, signing out. Peace.